The raids were usually 800 or 900 bombers.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pioneer Acres Radio. What a way to start a story, huh? That is our guest for this interview, Cecil Payne. And we have kind of a special gift for you guys because it's Friday and we're heading into a weekend. And we had a really great week here at Pioneer Acres because we got to sit down via Zoom with Cecil Payne and record a full-length, hour-long conversation with him about a kind of a special artifact that we've got here at Pioneer Acres. And this whole story happened because, well, I'm going to tell you all about it in the episode and you'll hear it in the interview. But I found a piece of paper that had some information about an artifact we had here, an old rod weeder that had been built by a young guy named Les Payne who participated in World War II. And we got to sit down with his little brother Cecil this week. And he told us about that rod weeder. We learned so much more about our own artifact, but Cecil also shared with us his memories about growing up on his family's farm here in southern Alberta in the 1930s and his memories of his brother Les. So what I'm kind of envisioning is that we're going into probably kind of a quiet weekend here in southern Alberta. And I don't know if you're going to be driving a tractor, putting in a crop, maybe doing laundry, washing your dishes. But if you are a fan of the long form interview, if you enjoy and appreciate a good story, then you're going to just add this episode to whatever it is you're doing this weekend. And you'll be learning about black lizards, about farmers' inventions in the 1930s, and there's this prairie family, and a war is heading straight toward them. And we'll talk about it all. So I'm really excited to share this interview with you with Cecil Payne. Thank you so much to Cecil and his daughter, Linda. As we're going through the interview, if you are watching the interview, you're going to be able to see a few family photos that Cecil and his daughter, Linda, have shared with us. And I'm also going to make those photos available on our Pioneer Acres Instagram account. And if you hop into Facebook stories, they'll be there as well. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for listening, and I hope everybody has a great weekend. Cecil, it's very, very nice to meet you. And
Hi.
I was just saying to Linda, like hopefully what my plan is to do like kind of a recording of our talk, and so that we can kind of share what you're going to say to me today with the people at Pioneer Acres who maybe have seen that rod weeder for years and years and didn't know what an important story there was about it. So thank you for spending some time with us today.
Okay.
Well,
I could tell you a story about Irricana too.
Okay, well, let's start with that.
1937, it's kind of notorious because we always came into Stampede. And we had an axe giveaway right at the middle of the street in Irricana. And that was a big deal then for the cost. You know, we only had so much money. All of a sudden we had to put in a new axle. So that's how I remember Irricana very well.
Was Les with you too, or just you and your parents?
No.
Wow. Well, I can, in some ways I want to say, I bet Irricana looks very different today from that day, but in some ways it hasn't changed that much. We haven't got
it hasn't changed. Oh no, the prairie towns haven't changed much because they were built up pretty well in those days. Hannah was much bigger then than it is now. They've all gone downhill.
What we've lost, which is pretty sad, is the grain elevator. And
Yes.
that part is sad because we don't have a grain elevator in Irricana anymore, and so many of the little towns don't have them anymore.
Yeah, I worked quite a bit in one when I was a little kid.
Oh yeah. So
moving grain needs to be dusty as heck in those.
I bet. So where was it that you grew up, Cease? Like where were you and you
Called
and you and your
Watts.
brothers lived?
It's called Watts, but I was born in Hannah.
Okay.
Watts is the next town to Hannah. There were towns every 7 miles.
Yeah. And we always say to people that that was to do with like the steam trains needed to stop and take on water for the steam.
What was that again?
We've always said to people that that is to do with stopping, and the steam trains had to stop every 7 miles and take on water, but I don't know if that's exactly.
No, that's not right.
That doesn't sound quite right. So it's
No,
alleged,
so that farmers wouldn't have to haul their grain more than 3.5 miles.
there we go. Yeah, and that was really important.
The horses
Yeah.
and wagons.
That's right. Yeah,
So
really
they'd
important.
be within one reach of one or the other.
Okay. So when were you, like, tell me about when you were born, like when was that, and and tell us about your family and where you were living in when.
Oh, well, we were on a farm 7 miles west of Hannah. And I was born in the Hannah Hospital.
Okay.
I was the first one born in the new section of the Hannah Hospital.
Oh my goodness, imagine that.
That wasn't the original Hannah Hospital.
Right.
It was the one that came after that. So I'm not that old, but I was born in 1929 out there. So.
Okay. And were you like, where did you fall in with your family? Like, were you the middle kid or the little guy, or who else was in your family?
I was the youngest.
Okay.
There were 4 boys.
Yeah. So 4 of you guys.
Yeah. That's was the next oldest.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the 1920s. You guys are in the Hannah area, farmers.
Well, yeah, my folks moved there in 1911.
Okay.
They just moved out from London onto Canada, or London, England.
They were English people and
Yeah.
had moved to Canada. What do you know about that? How did they decide that they wanted to move? Did they ever talk about what had influenced their
No,
decision?
there was a big pitch going around in these other countries. Come to Canada, free land and all that sort of stuff. And so it intrigued people who were never going to own a darn thing in their lives because it was all too expensive.
Yeah.
The ordinary person would never own any land. So it was an enticing thing for people at a young age. My dad was in the army at that time. And so, I don't know, he talked my mother into it. They never went back. I can't imagine how she felt when she saw the prairie out there after living in the middle of London all her life.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about that, what that was like for her, because, well, for both of them, because I don't think I can imagine anything more different than London. I've been there.
Oh, yeah.
I cannot think of a greater contrast of what they must have experienced coming from such an urban, modern place to,
Yes.
of all places, Hannah, Alberta. That area is so different.
Oh, God, yes. Yeah. It was a move that I couldn't imagine if I had ever done it myself. But they were adventuresome, and this thought of getting land of your own, it intrigued a lot of people.
It did.
They were never going to own anything.
Yeah.
That's the way it was. So that thought, I guess, brought them out, and they never went back. Quite a few did, but they never did.
Yeah. So they arrive and they've got their home, and what they began, and they start their family as well. Like what do you remember from those years? What were you told about those years? I've got pictures on that I've seen so many times of those black blizzards, and a lot of times people will look at them and say, oh, those dusty storms must have started in the 1930s, but nope, it was the 1920s already where some of those things had begun.
Oh, yeah.
So what were their memories of farming in that part of Alberta during those 20s and those 30s?
Well, my memories, because we never had a tractor, so I did a heck of a lot of work.
Yeah,
Everything was done by hand, grain was cut with binders. So we did, people owned binders. We didn't own one, but we did, I'm sorry. we owned a binder too, and that cut the grain, raw grain, and put it into bundles, it's called. And then bundles were put into stooks, and then the stooks were shoveled. When the threshing time came, they went to these stooks and threw them onto their wagon and took it to the combine. It was a thresher then, wasn't a combine. And that separated, beat it up, and took the grain up.
And I think a lot of people still feel like farming is a pretty labor-intensive job.
It was then.
At the time, oh my gosh.
Yeah. It was then, but it's not now.
No.
Now everything pretty well is mechanical. They've got hookups for just about every job done.
Yeah.
And of course, you go into the higher priced tractors. A tractor is worth, I don't know, 300,000, and you get one of those, and they got the air conditioning and the whole radio and the whole bit. And I know wives out where I came from, I've heard, they're quite happy to work. They just come in the morning, set the pattern on their GPS of what to cut, and then the GPS was working from photos from above, and it just, so they usually stay with it for the first round of the day. From then on, it's all automatic.
Yeah. My brother's big tractors that he has, they have nicer chairs in them than I have in my whole house.
Yes, they have.
The seat is so comfy and climate
Yeah.
controlled, and like you said, the GPS, they don't really need to do anything. And this
It's unbelievable how it can, how
yeah.
it can guide everything just from that.
Well, I'm thinking this is kind of an interesting thing, because the reason that you and I are speaking to one another today is because I found a bit of paper that had some information about a young guy named Payne who had built a rod weeder with some John Deere parts, and that it was somewhere at Pioneer Acres. So I went and said to our volunteers, do you know anything about this? They said, oh yes, we know about this rod weeder. That's kind of what you were talking about, is how labor intensive farming was at the time, and that those prairie kids were looking for ways to make their lives just a little bit easier.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of inventions going on.
Yeah. When I saw that rod weeder, what I immediately thought about was my own great uncle, because he was the same kind of person. He would get, I'm going to put photos in the article that we write, and I'll share photos too. But this rod weeder's got John Deere parts, but this young guy, your brother, when he was 17, he invented that. Well, that just reminded me, as I say, of my great uncle and so many other farmers I know from that time. They could just invent things like you're saying, and it has to do with what you're describing, with what hard work farming was.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of, I guess you might say, gifted guys that were on farms.
Very much so.
That did a lot of work with working with bending metal and all that, the forges, which I'll get into later. But so the ones are inventive minded. Those that didn't have much moxie as far as engineering going or construction, they pretty well had a hard time on a farm, because you had to do it. You had to be handy, do it yourself. You couldn't call in everybody because they weren't around. You couldn't stop and go to town with a car because a lot of people didn't even have a car.
When I have been taking people on tours to see that rod weeder and some of these other inventions we have around here, what I sometimes say to people is, I don't know if Les couldn't afford the one that he wanted at the John Deere dealership, or maybe he just didn't like it well enough and thought he could make a better one. Because it was often both, right?
Well, they really didn't go into the manufacturing business. This was really the only one they had.
Yeah.
It was a prototype, and it stayed it was used by a couple of farmers in a row that bought the farm. But past that, it was just laid aside with the new equipment. They were new. You see, the rod weeder is so it doesn't disturb the surface.
Yeah, I wanted you to talk to that about that because we're talking right. Well, first of all, can we back up a little bit? Can you tell me what that was like in the 20s and 30s, like when you were doing that farming? What was that like in your part of Alberta? Were you guys dealing with a lot of dust storms and things like that?
There were quite a few, yeah.
Yeah,
Once a week was fairly common, but
yeah,
that was I call that pretty frequent. Once
yeah,
every 2 or 3 weeks, and then some years they had hardly any. You had to have a dry spell and then a wind come up after that,
yeah,
and so then it would. I've come home from school against the 80-mile-an-hour wind. It was a dust storm, and we could only see about 6 feet in front of you. It just absolutely blackened the sky.
So when I'm taking people around Pioneer Acres, we have a few noble blades here, and I will show those to people and I'll explain that this was a farmer who was attempting to figure out ways to keep that, like to stop that from happening, to not have the soil
Yeah.
go away. But
Yeah.
the rod weeder has kind of a similar concept. Do you want to just walk us through what that rod weeder was supposed to do for our city audience who maybe doesn't know?
Well, one of the worst things they do for that they don't do anymore, that was cut everything and then have the harvest done and then maybe burn the straw even. Whereas
Wow.
it should have been dropping the straw right where they cut it.
Yeah.
That was a big mistake of treating the straw that was cut down, cut away. So it was really wasteful when you think back about it. That could have held the soil down
Yeah.
and provided fertilizer also.
So for our audience that's listening, I know we have many farmers who know exactly what you're talking about. For a city audience, kind of what we're wanting you to know is that farmers at the time they were trying to control weeds. And one of the ways that they would sometimes do that is by working the soil over and over until it was black. And then like Cecil's describing some other farming practices. And unfortunately, that was not the right farming approach. It might
No,
have
it
been
wasn't.
in
No.
England or the eastern part of this continent, but we do not have the humidity or the rain that we need here for that to work. And so those storms that Cecil is telling you guys about was caused by those farming practices.
Yeah,
So,
it was.
yeah. So when Cecil is telling you guys, like he's going to start describing what this rod weeder was supposed to do, pay close attention because this is how farmers were trying to solve this problem. Because they still need to weed, they still need to control the weeds, but they need to find ways so that they're not turning the soil over so it's blowing away.
Yeah, no, all was part of the studies and all that under what they call the special areas. Had it under special areas board.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they had their own jurisdiction out there, their own offices and everything. So they did their own survey of farms, practices, and tried to improve on them. But they still did an awful lot of that wasteful, doing what, harvesting the grain and then wasting it
Yeah.
in stacks and all that.
Yeah.
Rather than if they could have just scattered it all again out on the field, that would have been a much smarter.
So around the Payne household, like so many other places in southern Alberta, those farmers in your family were trying to figure out what to do about that. And you've got a 17-year-old brother called Les, and he's got an idea about what he's going to do to solve this problem. So tell us about what Les built. Do you remember him making that? Do you remember anything about that? What did people tell you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You know what a forge is?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think probably at some farm sale, my dad picked up a forge. That is a blower and the bowl that you put coal in, all that, and brought that home. And so Les had a forge to start working with. You know, he'd never run one in his life to know what you did. But anyhow, you got the right coal that gives off heat, and round bowl about 3 feet across, and you fill that full of coal, and then light it, and then had a blower underneath that blew up through the coal.
Wow.
And that's what gave it the blast. And so the faster you turn, which I know, because I used to turn the handle, and if you wanted it white hot, you could get it, everything white hot.
Man,
That's really hot. So
yeah,
you just a matter of putting more air onto it and giving it a blast. So this blast furnaces you hear about in factories, they're doing the same thing.
yeah. Wow.
And
Yeah,
so when they took a piece of metal and put it in that and then brought it out, they could pound it into whatever shape they wanted.
yeah, yeah. Wow. So you just there you were turning helping out around that white hot metal while this rod weaver.
Oh yeah, I spent hours turning the forge.
Yeah.
And-
I want you to know, Cease, we've had a lot of farmers around here at Pioneer Acres, and when they see that rod weeder, they totally get what was going on there. They're like, oh yeah, like they like totally understand, like that belt is turning this rod, and it still makes sense to farmers today.
Well, that would be good to find somebody that kind of had that sense, because even back in those days, they were still turning it over, as you say, working it 3 or 4 times a year. Well, you're not supposed to do that. You
That's
work
right.
it once if you could,
Yeah.
no more.
So if I were speaking with your brother, I would want him to tell me like what inspired him to make that. Like, did he have some parts lying around? Had he seen some somewhere? Like, did you know anything about that? Did he say what he wanted it for? And I can just imagine.
Yes, I'm sure he did. He must have drawn these plans out in his head, I think, and then put them on the paper. And then he needed, for the main beams, he had 4 of those, and he had to find 4 binders that people had abandoned.
Yeah.
1 for each one.
Yeah.
And that gave the curved part that curved around and held the rod weeder into the ground. So that was what he did with that. And of course, it needed a lot of shaping and cutting before it would hold. He had to buy, I think it was inserts for the bottom pipes. He bought them from a factory, and then that was what the rod turned in, had a bearing, you know. So it was really a ball bearing apparatus, nicely made. And so it'd have to fit one of those into each one of these arms that was running into the ground, if you could see what I mean.
Yeah.
And the round part went into the ground no more than 6 inches. And then this rod would turn backwards. It would turn, if you were going to the left, you'd turn the rod to the right. So it was kind of back turning on the dirt. You didn't turn it the same way you were going. You turned it opposite.
So for the listeners, like what's happening is this rod's just ripping weeds right out at the root, but underneath the soil. It's not disturbing the soil at all.
No, not disturbing. It's just tearing the roots hopefully out and then leaving the soil just the way it was.
What was he using to pull it, Cease?
Sorry?
What was he using to pull it? What did you guys have to drag it
Oh,
around?
horses. We only had
Yes,
horses.
we were using horses. Yeah, I want
I
to
was
know
on
about
a farm for 18 years and never did have a tractor.
that. Wow.
So I was raised with driving horses and rounding them out and hooking them up every morning. And usually I had a dog that would go in and out and bring them in from the field.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, lots of adventures. I enjoyed it. I didn't mind it. And as my saying goes to describe all these things, they're all acceptable to you if you don't know better.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
Working in the fields was all right because most of the other kids were too around me.
Yeah.
Then tractors started to come in, but we never did get one.
Mhm.
They put out small Fordsons, they called them to start with. And those were the first tractors.
So I'm going to ask you first a couple of family stories about your brother, about those years. This is great. What I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to share some of the photographs that Cease and his daughter Linda have shared with us at Pioneer Acres, because I've got some pretty cute photos here of some boys frolicking around and like doing hard work too. But
yeah, I should be able to explain them, I think.
yeah, that's right. So yeah, just anything you want to tell us about growing up with four, did you say four brothers?
Three brothers and me. We're four boys, yeah.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
So
Uh,
that's what we did now since I think Les, I can't remember what age he was, but he was at least 5 years older than me.
Yeah.
So I was the youngest. And so Les was the next, and then there were two older ones than that. Well, the one that was first one, of course, he he absorbed the starting of farming because he was the first kid there.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be in that picture. That would be him and my mother. Yeah, that's or Tom, I should say. His name was Horace Frederick, but he changed that immediately at his early age. He called himself Tom. He didn't like the other name, so all his school pals and friends and later on that never knew what his name was.
Oh, isn't that something?
He invented his own name and he stuck with it.
Oh, it wasn't dignified enough. Okay, I'm just, we're probably going to do an audio version of this, but if you're watching this interview, hopefully everybody can see that. Can you see that, Cease?
Oh yeah.
We've got a photo of a family here. So who's everybody in this family photo? Who are these people?
Oh yeah. Well, that was my mother and Tom, and that is a shed to keep the chickens in. That was
Okay.
a chicken house. It
Yeah.
had openings for it just off the ground, but around to the side. So this was to get, to get ourselves in and out. But the chickens had their own entrances to it and bins along it. So you put grain along, they could reach in and feed themselves.
Got it. Okay, I'm going to try to share something else here.
Yeah.
Is there a different photo there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some family, and there's a man and there's four boys in this photo. So who's this?
Well, it's my dad, and then the next one to him is the oldest one, Tom.
Okay.
And then Jeff, and then Les is the third one here. I'm the one that's a baby.
I was going to say, who's this cute little guy with his feet?
Les is the one smiling there.
Oh,
Smiling.
yeah.
And that's the only new car we ever had on the farm. 1929 Chevrolet.
That's the only new car your mom and dad ever.
We had a good crop the year before, so that winter my dad and mother spent the winter in Vancouver. Yeah, so and they rented their house out to somebody else, and they took the two kids. Let's see, who was it then? Jeff and Les. They took those with them. I wasn't born yet.
Okay. So
that was their big year.
Yeah, they had a break. Okay, yeah. What about this one? I'm trying to share another pretty cute photo.
Oh,
here.
That's me and Les.
There's you and Les. Okay, so you're the little guy.
Yeah, they're boxing gloves, and so he just did that for laughs.
Brothers boxing, never. Can't believe this.
Yeah, so my brothers used to box each other a lot.
Yeah. No, I thought a couple of those photos, we just had to share them because those are just great. And it looks like you always had quite a great sense of style because I think your beanie in those pictures was pretty cute, that little hat.
Oh, yeah.
As well. And yeah, of course, I was going to say to you, of course, your parents could only afford one new car. They were feeding four boys.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that wasn't easy. And they had to grow up a bit before they could, work on the farm and be useful.
Yeah.
So it was a matter of feeding and clothing them until they got useful.
Yeah.
Had to make their own money.
Oh my goodness. Cease, I'm going to kind of start steering the conversation in a little bit of a different direction because of like these memories of growing up and this rod weeder being made. The thing is when I found the rod weeder and the documents for the rod weeder, what it said is this was built by 17-year-old Les Payne, and it's 1937 when he built it.
Okay, yeah, that'll be right.
And now as a historian, and because we have the benefit of hindsight, your heart always stands a bit still for the guys who were born in that 1919, 1920,
Yes.
because you know what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Oh,
'Cause they were all in the Air Force. Of course, I wasn't. But
Yeah,
they were
you're-
all 3 pilots. They all became pilots. And Les was the only one that got killed in the war.
yeah.
He didn't come back. Yeah, the others did.
So I was going to ask you about if you remembered him enlisting, but you actually, your family went through that 3 times, like all 3 boys that went and enlisted.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember him disappearing because we were out walking in the fields one Sunday, and there was neighbors along, and we were just out for a walk. And there was quite a bit of scattered cloud, and this Harvard yellow aircraft came flying out of one cloud and over into another and disappeared. And I
Wow.
know he was just enthralled, and I knew right then that something has happened to this guy. He's been hooked on this, as all sorts of prairie kids were, because, well, it was kind of unfair because they had nothing better to do. They didn't have jobs. And so when something like this, you know, intrigue, get your own, join up, they fed you, you got new clothing,
Mhm.
and new machinery, you know, new aircraft.
Yep.
So it was all the things that kids on a farm dreamed of that didn't have anything else.
Yeah.
So as I say, it was unfair, but it's the way it happened.
My friend Anne has interviewed many, many, many veterans.
Oh,
And
yeah.
one man told her that he was the littlest in his family and he joined because he'd never had a new suit of clothes that were just his in his whole life.
Yeah, well, that.
We cannot imagine.
Yeah,
We can't imagine.
yeah, it doesn't seem like a good reason, but it sure did at the time when you didn't have clothes that, you know, just hand-me-downs. That's what I had.
Yeah.
I can remember that I never resented that at all. I was never thinking, God, I wish I had a new suit for this or that. And I never did have until I got married. And so it appealed to kids. Nice looking uniform and new equipment. So it didn't have anything much to lose. So join up.
Yeah. Well, now you're really small, kind of watching all this happen, but I want to know what it was, how your mom and dad felt about that. Like, I know you were really little, but stuff you remember about, you know, 1939, you know, we have the Prime Minister of Canada at the time, and he's promising your sons are not going to be sent into a foreign war. And then that promise doesn't happen, but your parents were English, like they're watching Germany threatening their country and their home where
Oh,
they
yeah.
came from. Like how were they feeling? Do you remember what
They
their
didn't
first-
agree with this theory that we could stay out of the war.
Okay.
You know, like
Yeah.
Quebec being affected by the French, they didn't like wars.
Right.
And of course, this is what I hold against them. So they did the end to the last war. They were attacked, but they weren't ready for it. They were right beside Germany and saw what she was going to do, and they stayed out of it. And then so this is on the side. This is my personal feeling. So 2
Yeah.
wars in a row, the US, Great Britain, and the Commonwealth had to go over and rescue France.
Yep.
And they
Yeah.
just lost a fraction of the people. There were a lot of heroes in France too,
Oh, of course there were.
but,
Yeah.
but generally they were out of it. They didn't have an army prepared or a darn thing. And as I say, they could see what Hitler was going to do. And so they all joined up and felt this way. And being, as you say, English too, that had an effect.
Yes. I can just imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I'm just trying to do is I'm just trying to share a photo that that Linda had sent me. But as I'm just trying to do that, let's just take, I guess, so I guess what I'm wanting to ask about is like, that's like your parents knew that it was just not going to work to stand to the side and that they were going to have to be involved, but that personally impacted them because they had those three boys that were going to be
Yeah,
a part
they
of
were
that.
English, and that was what was being attacked.
Yeah,
Or
That's
they were
right.
fighting back at least, yes.
yeah,
So that was the connection, and it almost guaranteed that they were going to go to war.
yeah. So as that is happening, who joins first? Which of your brothers goes first?
Jeff, the second oldest, joined first,
Okay,
and then the second oldest joined, and then Les. So
okay,
he was the third one to join,
yeah,
and then he became a flight instructor in the Vulcan airport, and so he had 7,000 or 8,000 hours of flying in before he went overseas.
yeah,
So he was one of the senior pilots they got, and so they put him in the Pathfinder squadrons, they called it, and so it was kind of ironic where I'm digressing here, but anyhow, they were on, the raids were usually 800 or 900 bombers up in the dark. And so the one from my Tom's squadron, my oldest brother, he ran, I've recreated it from everything I've read and heard. One of his planes flew up into the bottom of Les's plane and set off a bomb. It must have been not a big one, probably a 500 pounder. And so I think that killed everybody in that plane except my brother, because he is a pilot and he's the only one that had any armor plate behind him. But the bomb would have gone off right behind him,
Right.
within 5 feet. So it was amazing he could keep doing what he did. So he kept flying the thing until finally he came down, and he came down too fast. And we'll never know. Maybe his controls were out of order and he couldn't slow it. He came down facing the fire, the light from the fire from the plane that had run into him.
yeah,
It had crashed, and so it was the only light in sight. So I'm sure that's why he tried to come down beside it, and he almost made it. He came down just a bit too fast. He came down probably 150 miles an hour, and he should have come down about 70 or 80.
yeah.
And so it plowed across this field and into the trees. And so that's what killed the rest. If there was anybody still alive, that's what finished the job then.
Wow.
So we've all been over there and seen where the planes came down, talked to the boys that were there that played in the aircraft when it was, after it crashed. And so they saw it firsthand, but when they first got there in the morning, the bodies were still there. So I guess the doctors or whoever is responsible, they checked them all, and then there was nobody left alive. Whether they were left, because they would have crashed about midnight, and this was probably 8 or 9 before they got out in the morning. So whether some of them were alive before they finally people came along and picked them up, we don't know. We'll never know.
Right. Oh, man. So you guys, and I guess what's interesting about that is that was in 1945. So that was when he was killed, wasn't he? And
Yes.
So he was an experienced bomber pilot.
Yes,
He'd
he
been
was.
flying for a long time by that time. The war, at the end of the war, by that point, everyone could see that it was in sight, because his mission that he flew where the accident, that was actually in Germany, wasn't it? Where the accident.
Yeah, it was flying the bomb Zeets.
Yeah.
So my oldest brother, I think he was 32 when he went over. And my brother already going to be posted overseas, but he was on leave. And he said to my mother, "Oh, you don't have to worry about Tom. He's too old. They won't take him over."
Yeah.
Golly, he was posted overseas right away, and so that
Yeah.
surprised everybody. And he had he had a plane that blew up just as he was gonna, he got out of it. But just as he was gonna take off, they had trouble and it spun across the field. So he got all the crew out, and then it blew and took the roofs off about 6 houses around there, farmhouses.
Wow.
So he had his, and so, and he never should have been there because he was not the adventuresome type really, to be in a warplane, but he ended up there and did a good job. Apparently he got back, but he hated it. He never got into a plane again, and anybody talked about it, like my by then I had a young baby guy come along, a nephew of his. So he said one day to Uncle Tom, did you kill anybody in the war? And we just all cringed and were sitting around.
Oh boy.
He says, well, I think probably, but I don't know. Which
Yeah.
was true because they were in bombers way above. So they
Yeah.
could not like hand to hand or face to face fighting. So, but it was, and he was just the last type that would kill anything. Never did, even in the rest of his life. He's just the most peaceful guy you could ever meet. But a lot of them were like that. They ended up doing their job, not liking it, I guess, but doing it.
I guess what has been really interesting thing for me when I found your brother's story and learned what had happened about that accident, and I was realizing that he was an experienced pilot. He'd been flying for a long time by then. The end of the war was in sight, and I had a really interesting experience last summer because one of the people that was working here, he's called Josh, and he is 17 years old. And one day my nephew came to visit Pioneer Acres, and my nephew is also 17 years old. And Josh and James both really are interested in the war. And so Josh took James out to see this Rod Weeder. And they were, just this hero of theirs, this Les Payne that had been in the war. He was a pilot, this Canadian hero. And I had a big lump in my throat because Josh and James are just the perfect age.
Yes,
they had gone into the war for something. Like they were very focused on the part that was so glorious, and I was just looking at both of them, thinking how I'd feel if something had happened to one of them.
Yeah, no, that's you look at that now. I did too. Still looking for the ones at that age and think, oh, what would they have been growing up to be?
That's the other important thing I wanted to say. Like for your brother at 17 to invent something so interesting and to be, to have that thought process and be so determined and be able to invent something like that, that was a huge loss for Canada, because what would he have gone on to do?
Yeah, he had a real belt for engineering, and he did everything right. And now in the Air Force, he ended up with one of his buddy was named Case, and Case is a manufacturer of agriculture equipment.
Sure is.
Company like Massey Harris and Case and all that. So he and Lauren Case got together, and I thought they were probably going to be together after the war.
Oh.
And probably gone into business, yeah.
Wow.
So that interrupted something that was probably pretty positive going to happen.
That's right.
They had a lot of fun together for a couple of years.
When's the last time you saw your brother, Cease?
Sorry?
When do you remember the last time you saw Les?
Oh, it would have been, oh gosh, a year before he was killed.
Yeah, 1944 sometime.
Yeah, because he was sent to various stations before he went on to action.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would have been a year.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't see their guys that for years they were killed, especially in the Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in the Air Force is a little more palatable because they got a little more leave, I think. But
Mhm.
then when they were going to go overseas, they got special leave for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I guess we have had veterans in my family as well. My grandpa was in the Navy.
Okay.
We had a family member who served in World War I. He's called Haddon Ellis, and he's a
Wow.
cousin. And Haddon was killed. And you would not believe the baby boy Haddons in our community
Yeah.
after the next generation. There's like, you could tell something has happened because that person that's gone, it's funny how things are never quite the same without them.
Oh, exactly. You wonder what the hole would have filled up with if it kept going.
Oh, yeah. When we're saying lest we forget, like it's not just the loss of that person, but their families are just never the same again either. I want to know how your mom and dad, I was thinking about them and what that must have been like to lose
Oh,
them.
it's terrible. Yeah,
Terrible.
they just got a telegram is all they got.
Heartbreaking.
Here
Yeah.
it is. He's
Yeah.
presumed missing, presumed dead, and that's what they had. And that's when I came home from school. That's what my mother was sitting with that. So that's the first I heard. And we're a pretty stoic family.
Yeah.
You know, the English is not that much emotion. So I could tell she was just really shaken to the core. And so she never really got over that, which I could understandable. And so, but you know, it was a terrible shock to bear.
Yeah. I describe it as an honor to sit with the families of people who got telegrams like that.
Yes, it is.
And but it is always such a sorrowful thing. And it doesn't matter that it's 75 or 80 years ago. You can tell people have never, ever been the same after that.
I've got something amusing to tell you about that too. Well, we talked about relatives in the army.
Mm.
Now, I had a relative that was in the Revolutionary War. He was a great, 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 great uncle.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So he fought through the battles of Gettysburg and all that. Because he was, you know, from England, and the English were there trying to defend their part of it.
That's right.
And he survived that war, and he was in 3 other battles after that, various places. Our oldest daughter does work on, you know, what do you call it, genealogy.
Yeah.
So she's uncovered these sort of things. It's
Wow.
ridiculous. So anyhow, he was in the artillery, and he retired finally at 85 years old.
My goodness.
I think it was because he probably had a special gun and only he knew how to work it.
Right.
They had to keep him.
You're descended from warriors, Cecil.
Yeah.
And that goes to show you, if that is true, then Les was descended from an inventor who just was going to figure out how to do that.
Oh yeah, there were others like that too.
Yeah.
Huh.
Wow.
So a lot of stories back there, and I'm glad you kind of unearthed again for me, because I like to relive them, and I was always interested in that. Not that I liked war, but I always thought that if you have to have war, you have to have it. And there was lots of Canadians and lots of others that didn't believe that. They kept the kids all at home, you know, and safety and on the farm, because you got permit to have them look after the farm if they thought you were infirm or unable to. So you could get permits that way. But we never took advantage of that. As I say, my dad was in the cavalry when he was young. So.
Well, I guess I know this is going to sound really, really small, but just kind of on behalf of myself and my family, I want to say thank you to the Paynes, because that was a huge, huge sacrifice, such a hard person to miss. I want you to know how much I enjoyed this story, enjoyed hearing about Les and your memories of growing up out here in the 1930s. And that rod weeder is a treasured artifact around here, and we proudly show it to visitors all the time.
Yeah, it was all a big history, a big story at the time. And I've always been interested in history because that's, I've got a big Indian hammerhead that I found in the fields and arrowheads and all that sort of thing. So I've been interested, and I've got various artifacts from Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Europe from battlefields. So it's not that I love the battles, but I think I love the history.
I'm the same.
Learning about them and who was there and what were they doing and why. Of course, a lot of them in Europe ones are just land grabbing kings that wanted to have more land than the other king had. So you really no good reason for them to be at war, but they did. They with the knights and all that. So they had various battles, and I suppose my relatives probably were involved in some of that.
I think mine were too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying. It's not the war that we're interested in, but the stories are interesting.
Oh yeah, you can't change them. So that established history came along and was established and interesting and true. So you kind of had to be interested in it if you're interested in history at all. Unfortunately, it's wars that have made the kind of England the way it is, and the rest of the world they've been fighting since the first human being was evolved.
I think what I kind of had in my mind as you were saying that is I was thinking about, I can't remember if it's in the Bible or if it's a hymn, but that old poem about when in times of war, the farmers will take the plows and turn them into swords. And in times of peace, they take the swords and turn them back into plowshares.
Oh yeah.
And I think your brother and your family story is just a really unique blend of both of those. But I can't tell you how thankful I am to have lived under the plow my whole life. As tough as farming is, oh.
Yeah, he was already interested in the machinery.
Yes.
So it's similar there. But he was gone before they turned it back into a plowshare.
That's right. Yeah. Wow. Cecil, thank you to you and to Linda for setting this up, for spending this time with me. Is there anything else you want people at Pioneer Acres to think about or that you'd like to say?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, he had to be there. He was quite a hero, and when he'd fly his plane out over Hannah and over the farms there quite frequently, and so buzz the farms. So
Of course.
I became a little bit of a hero because it was my brother up there, and so that was a sort of side adventure for me, and so there were all sorts of incidental things happened. I always remember my mother driving over to meet my, Jeff decided to get married, and she was going over to meet the family and all that. And she was going along a highway there, and this plane buzzed her. She looked aside and it was coming right at her. And they love to do that.
Yeah.
Just for adventure.
Yeah, scare the daylights out of people.
It scared the hell out of her.
Yeah.
So that's all sorts of side issues like that. Yeah.
Well, that is just a perfect place to finish with a buzzing from a farm kid.
Yeah.
Mom.
Oh,
Scaring the daylights out of her.